There's something you've always felt, but never had the words for. A quiet knowing that followed you through childhood. Not a voice exactly, but a weight, a presence, as if you carried an invisible history older than your years. You saw through things others accepted. You sensed what went unspoken. You absorbed pain that wasn't yours. And often you suffered for it. You were told you were too sensitive, too strange, too serious. You asked why when others were content with what. You challenged what you were told. You felt truth not in logic, but in vibration. And so the world labeled you anxious, difficult, overdramatic, maybe even crazy. But what if the truth is far more sacred than you've ever been allowed to believe? What if you weren't broken? You were ancient? What if your sensitivity was never a flaw, but a feature of something deeper? The soul of the old one? Carl Jung knew this path well. He believed that we are not blank slates born into the world, but vessels of archetypal memory, that the soul carries a pattern, an ancient blueprint, a code that reaches back into the collective unconscious, the timeless river of all human experience. And in that river, certain archetypes return again and again. The seeker, the wounded healer, the old soul, those rare beings who do not arrive here to blend in, but to remember, to carry something forward, to heal what others refuse to even feel. But that remembering comes at a cost, because to carry the light of ancient wisdom, you must first walk through the darkness of modern forgetfulness. You were likely born into a family that didn't understand you, a school system that couldn't nourish you, a culture that silenced what you knew to be real. Your emotions were too much. Your imagination was unrealistic. Your inner world was just a phase. So you began to question yourself. You tried to become normal, to numb your depth, to shrink your vision, to erase your essence just to feel like you belonged. But no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't forget what you felt. You couldn't forget that some things are true, even if they can't be proven, that some feelings are older than language, that your longing for something more wasn't foolish. It was ancestral, and that ache inside you, the one that kept you awake at night, it wasn't madness. It was your calling, the whisper of yourself, echoing from a deeper place, asking you to wake up. You see, Jung didn't believe the self was just a higher version of the ego. He saw it as the totality of your being, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, past and future. To become whole wasn't about fixing yourself. It was about remembering yourself. And old souls, they've done this dance before. They come into this life with fragments already stirred, memories they can't trace, fears that don't make sense, wisdom they never learned, pain they didn't earn. And because no one around them sees it, they begin to think, I must be crazy. But you're not crazy. You're attuned. You're tuned to a frequency most people spend their lives avoiding. A frequency that picks up the hidden suffering in others, that feels the weight of unspoken tension, that senses the lies behind polite smiles, that sees the soul behind the mask. And while others numb, you feel. While others follow, you question. While others sleepwalk, you awaken. But awakening is lonely, because when you begin to see through the dream, you also begin to see your aloneness in it. Friends drift. Lovers misunderstand. You watch the world chase things that make you feel nothing. And in that silence, you begin to grieve. You grieve the life you could have had if you'd just stayed asleep. You grieve the comfort of being normal. You grieve the ease of not knowing. You grieve a world that still doesn't speak your language. But that grief is sacred, because it's the initiation of the old soul. The old soul does not awaken through pleasure. They awaken through loss, through the cracking of illusion, through the collapse of identities that never fit. This is the sacred fracture, the moment the persona shatters, and the real self begins to emerge. Jung called this the confrontation with the unconscious, the meeting of ego and shadow, the beginning of individuation. And while the world might pathologize your breakdown, the soul knows the truth. You are not breaking down. You are breaking open. You are not unraveling. You are revealing. And yes, it's painful. Yes, it's disorienting. Yes, it's terrifying. But it is necessary, because only by shedding what is false can you make room for what is eternally true. And the truth is this: you were never meant to blend in. You were never meant to numb yourself just to feel safe. You were never meant to be understood by a world that fears depth. You were meant to remember. to walk into the fire, to gather the wisdom, to bring it back, not for praise, but for purpose, because old souls do not return for ease. They return for evolution, and though you may never hear applause, and though you may walk much of your path alone, you carry something that cannot be measured by this world, a sacred responsibility to awaken within it. So what does it actually mean to be an old soul? Not in the romanticized sense of sipping tea while reading ancient texts, but in the raw, everyday reality of carrying depth in a shallow world. It means being born with a kind of soul gravity, a pull toward meaning that others don't seem to feel. It means walking through life as if you're remembering something, but can't quite put your finger on what it is. And that is maddening, because the world doesn't mirror that remembering. It reflects noise. It rewards conformity. It promotes the shallow, the fast, the numbing. So what happens when you carry ancient sensitivity? In a culture obsessed with speed and spectacle, you suffer. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also knew that becoming isn't easy. It's a kind of psychic birth, and every birth begins in darkness. Old souls often endure early initiations. You might have faced abandonment, emotional neglect, or trauma before you even had words to understand what was happening. Why? Because the soul, in its wisdom, knows what it's here for, and it orchestrates conditions that crack the shell of superficiality early on. Pain becomes the teacher. Loss becomes the mirror. Loneliness becomes the doorway. But what's behind that doorway? The self. Not the personality, not the curated identity, but the vast, paradoxical, eternal self that Jung believed was the organizing principle of the psyche. You see, old souls are not here to just cope. They are here to integrate. They are not here to fit in. They are here to embody archetypes. The wise one, the wounded healer, the mystic, the seer. And the more you suppress that archetypal energy, the more it contorts into shadow. This is why so many old souls suffer from anxiety, depression, or addiction. Not because they're defective, but because they're disconnected from their inner archetype. They've been trained to silence their visions, to doubt their insights, to mistrust their inner authority. So instead of following the thread of intuition, they stay trapped in the logic of survival. And make no mistake, that creates suffering, because when you know you're here for more, but you've been conditioned to settle for less, you begin to wither from the inside out. Jung understood this internal collapse. He called it the midlife crisis, but it's not just about age. It's about awakening. It's the moment the ego cracks, and the self begins to rise. And when the self rises, it doesn't just ask for change. It demands transformation. It disrupts relationships. It shakes up careers. It questions beliefs. It pulls you away from the life you built for survival, and toward the life aligned with your essence. And yes, this path is terrifying, because it often begins with destruction. The destruction of illusion. The destruction of who you thought you were. The destruction of the masks that once kept you safe. But in that rubble is gold. Because Jung taught that the shadow, the hidden, repressed part of you, holds not just your pain, but your power. Old souls carry a deep shadow, not because they are bad, but because they are vast. They carry generations of unprocessed emotion. They inherit the soul memory of lineages that never healed. And when you begin to do the work, the real work of integration, you don't just heal yourself. You begin to transmute everything that came before you. This is what Jung meant by the individuation process. It's not self-improvement. It's self-union. It's bringing together your conscious mind and unconscious depths. It's standing at the center of your contradictions and saying, all of this is me. The rage, the tenderness, the brilliance, the fear. It's not about fixing yourself. It's about including yourself. And that is the spiritual labor of the old soul. You become the bridge between past and future, between wound and wisdom, between the personal and the archetypal. You walk through your own darkness, not just to escape, but to harvest something sacred from it. That harvest is what you came to offer, but you can't offer it until you own it. So if you've been spiraling, doubting, retreating, understand this. You are not lost. You are being summoned. Summoned inward. Summoned deeper. Summoned into the heart of the self, where your truth has been patiently waiting. And that truth is not gentle. It's not easy. It's not love and light. It is raw, unapologetic, liberating. It says, stop playing small to keep others comfortable. Stop pretending you don't know who you are. Stop betraying your soul for acceptance. Because your soul didn't come here to be liked. It came to be lit. Lit by remembrance. Lit by purpose. Lit by the fire of your own becoming. And that fire, once awakened, can't be put out. You can try to go back to sleep, but you'll feel hollow. You can try to dim your light, but it will burn in your bones. You can try to deny your calling, but it will haunt you in every silence. Because the self doesn't forget. It waits. It watches. It whispers. And eventually, it roars. That roaring is what you feel now. That deep restlessness. That spiritual agitation. That ache for something real. It's not a crisis. It's a threshold. You are standing at the doorway between who you've been and who you're becoming. And the only way out is through. But what happens when the call is ignored? What happens when the old soul tries to live a young soul's life? We see it everywhere. Gifted beings numbing their gifts. Healers who never heal themselves. Visionaries who drown their visions in addiction, perfectionism, or endless distraction. Because here's the truth Jung saw so clearly. The self, your highest, truest essence, demands to be lived. And when it is not, it begins to sabotage everything false around it. This is why so many spiritual awakenings begin in collapse. A breakup, a breakdown, a betrayal, a burnout so intense it scorches your carefully curated identity. Jung called this the psychic death. It is the moment the ego realizes it is not the king, but merely a servant of something much greater. And if you resist this moment, if you fight it, suppress it, medicate it, it will only return louder, darker, and more destructive. Because the unconscious does not sleep. It waits, and when ignored, it erupts. That eruption can take many forms. A panic attack that seems to come out of nowhere. A deep depression that refuses to lift. A sudden aversion to the life you once built with pride. An overwhelming sense that you are living someone else's story. That's not dysfunction. That's the self trying to wake you up. Because here's the secret no one tells you. The pain of not living your truth is greater than the pain of confronting it. And so, the longer you deny the soul, the more fragmented you become. This is where the shadow thrives. In your avoidance. In your spiritual bypassing. In your refusal to feel what demands to be felt. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And oh, how that darkness shows up. You project it onto others, blaming your partner for your dissatisfaction, criticizing others for the very traits you suppress in yourself, judging the world while secretly judging yourself. You act it out in compulsions, overworking to avoid stillness, overeating to numb emptiness, chasing relationships that mimic your wounds just to feel something familiar. You spiritualize it, turning love and light into a shield, using meditation as escape, reciting affirmations while avoiding accountability. This is the twisted brilliance of the unconscious. It finds ways to survive your suppression, but survival is not the same as awakening. To awaken, you must confront. You must stand in front of the mirror of your own life and ask, what have I abandoned in myself to be accepted by others? What parts of me have I exiled in the name of fitting in? What truth have I swallowed for the illusion of peace? These are not comfortable questions, but they are liberating ones, because only through confronting the false can you reclaim the real. And the real is messy. It is raw. It does not come pre-packaged in spiritual jargon. It comes in tears, in rage, in sudden clarity, in sleepless nights where your soul whispers, I'm still here. It's the moment you realize you've never been broken, only buried beneath conditioning, beneath fear, beneath a lifetime of being told you're too much, too weird, too intense. But here's what Jung knew. Intensity is not the problem. Suppression is, because what we resist becomes distorted, and what we suppress becomes fate. This is why old souls often feel trapped in cycles. Same patterns, same wounds, same emptiness dressed in new costumes. It's not because you're doomed. It's because your soul is trying to complete a story, a karmic loop, an ancestral thread, a personal myth that's begging to be rewritten by you. But to rewrite it, you must claim authorship. You must take the pen back from society, family, trauma, and hand it to the self. And the self doesn't write stories of comfort. It writes stories of initiation. That's what you're in. Not a crisis, not a failure, but a sacred initiation into who you were always meant to become. But initiation requires something in return. Sacrifice. You must be willing to sacrifice the roles that kept you safe, the identities that earned you love, the masks that made you relatable but suffocated your essence. Because if you don't, you will continue to betray yourself in the name of belonging. And self-betrayal is the slowest poison of all. It kills not with violence, but with silence. The silence of a soul that has stopped speaking, because no one ever listened. But it's not too late, because now you are listening. You're starting to feel the ache beneath the numbness, the longing beneath the logic, the fire beneath the fog. That fire is your truth. And truth is not gentle. It is a blade that cuts through illusion. It cuts through I'm fine. It cuts through I don't care. It cuts through I can't. Until all that's left is you, unmasked, undefended, undeniably whole. And it's from this place of naked truth that your life can begin again. Not as a performance, not as a reaction, but as a revelation. A life lived from the inside out, from the self, from soul. And that is what the old soul came here to do. Not to be understood, but to remember. The old soul's journey is not about escaping pain. It's about transmuting it, turning wounds into wisdom, loneliness into presence, confusion into clarity, and exile into sovereignty. Carl Jung didn't romanticize this process. He knew the path to wholeness was brutal at times, but also the most sacred path a human being could walk. Because once you integrate what was once rejected, you no longer chase healing. You become the healer. You no longer seek validation. You radiate authenticity. You stop trying to explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you, and start building a life that speaks for itself. That's the real power of individuation. Not just becoming different, but becoming whole. You reclaim all that was disowned. The fear you hid, the anger you swallowed, the dreams you deferred, the truth you diluted to be palatable. You gather them back, piece by piece, and say, this too is me. And suddenly, you become unshakable. Not because life is easy, but because you are no longer divided. You carry your contradictions like a crown. You hold your scars like sacred scripts. You speak from a place so deep, even silence listens. You realize you never needed to be saved, only seen. Seen by yourself, seen by the self, seen by the sacred mirror that was always within you. This is what Jung meant when he said, I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. Old souls don't become powerful by bypassing their pain. They become powerful by befriending it. They stop treating their sensitivity as a liability and start honoring it as a superpower. Because sensitivity isn't weakness. It's information. It's soul data. It's your system telling you where the world is too loud, where truth is being silenced, where love is being lost. And when you listen to that data, you begin to design a different life. A life that honors the slow, the deep, the unseen, the sacred. You stop measuring success by numbers and start measuring it by alignment. You stop chasing outcomes and start embodying intentions. You begin to live not as a reaction to the world, but as a transmission of your soul. And when you do that, you become magnetic, not in a performative sense, but in a deeply human sense. You become a sanctuary, a living permission slip, a reminder to others of what is real. And without trying, you begin to lead, not by force, but by frequency. People feel something around you, not because you're perfect, but because you're present. You're not trying to be someone. You're not stuck in performance. You're simply being. And that beingness changes everything. That's why you were chosen. Not for grandeur, not for ego, but for embodiment. To embody what the world forgets. To remember what the world represses. To speak what the world fears. To live what the world longs for. You weren't crazy. You were initiated. Initiated into the forgotten art of soul. Initiated into a lineage that stretches beyond bloodlines. Into archetypes, symbols, and inner gods. Initiated into truth so deep that language struggles to hold it. And now, it is time to live it. No more apologizing for your depth. No more shrinking for comfort. No more waiting to be ready. You are ready, because readiness is not a feeling. It's a decision. You decide to honor your soul. You decide to trust the self. You decide to take your place among the awakened. Not above others, but beside them. Because this isn't about hierarchy. It's about harmony. A collective of old souls who are no longer pretending, who are no longer numbing, who are no longer hiding their medicine. This is your invitation. Not just to heal, but to lead. Not just to awaken, but to embody. Not just to remember, but to become. You were never meant to walk this path alone, but you were meant to walk it first, to feel the ache before others, to hold the truth before it's popular, to carry the light before it's convenient. You were not crazy. You were called, and now you are answering. Subscribe to the Awakened Compass and join our membership to unlock the full journey within.